In this video, we're going to go over conditions and looping using JSTL standard tags. The nice thing about looking at using conditions and looping in our code is it's going to force a couple things right off the bat. Because we're now going to be able to start removing scriptlets and putting these JSTL tags in place, we'll actually start getting a better, more robust, and easier to maintain system in the long run. But the other thing it's going to do for us is it's going to force us to create better controllers. Since we won't be using scripting on our pages, our controllers are actually going to become much more robust and handle the code interaction in the way that they should have been in the first place, and thereby giving us a system that's easier to scale and use in larger projects, or if we decide to change out our views completely, we would still have our controllers and our models in place in a way that we could use them. So with that, let's go ahead and get the JSTL_conditions and Looping.war file, and we can load that into our system. And again, because our controllers need to be more robust now, we're going to have some controllers in place to get city data. This is going to remove all of the code that was interacting with the database on our web page for getting the cities or listing the cities into this controller. We'll put it into an array, put the array into a session, and we'll use that on the page, just like we've done before. Invalidate session and remove cookies is going to give us the ability to do this cookie handling management and session management behind the scenes. Now this is the way it should be, because cookies and sessions should be managed by the controller. The view should just be able to interact with those objects. It should not be setting them or removing them as we're doing here in the controller. Of course, we've got our login user, which is going to be the same thing we've done before: log in the user, set cookies, etc. And we have our sign out, which is just a session invalidation, so there's nothing new there too. But what we're really looking at now is using conditions and looping in our code. So there's going to be times when we need to check if something is in session, then do this. Before we were using scripting to do that. Now what we can do is actually use the cif tag. So what we'll see here in index is there's actually a couple different things I wanted to show here. So I commented out one which you can turn on and use later instead of the one that's showing. But what we can do is use this core tag prefix just like before and the if tag. And the test condition is what we're actually testing to see if it's true or not. So here we're going to use session scope.authorizedUser is not equal to null. We'll then print out the authorizedUser.userid from the expression language. You can see now no more scripting to test this, no more expressions from our scripting expressions. It's all done with expression language and our core tags. So this is very nice. It's much more succinct. There's no scripting scriptlet tags. Same thing for the session scope. Authorized user is not equal to null here. If it is equal to null, here we're going to actually print out returning users. So this is the same thing we were doing before, just with C tags instead of with scriptlets. Now the reason I left this in place is because if you're not familiar with this, we talked about this a little bit. You can use NE and EQ to signify not equal or equal. But if you like the regular old syntax, you can certainly use not equal and equal to accomplish the same thing. But you can see here, very easy to use the CF. Of course, there's no C else. So if you need to do more than one conditional check, your best bet is to just use the choose with when and otherwise. Just like if we would use a switch, we can actually build a when and otherwise clause on making different choices based on some test conditions. So when we want to list our cities, the first thing we need to make sure is that the user's logged in. Once they're logged in, we need to make sure they have the correct authorization level. If that's the case, we need to make sure that we still have a user ID that's valid. And then finally, we need to check, do we actually have the data in scope? And if we don't, then we need to get that data. And then finally, after that, we can actually go ahead and print out the message and then print out the user information. So what you can see here is we have a cchoose block, which wraps the entire thing. Just like if you were to say switch with brackets around it, you'd say cchoose. Now here, instead of having case 1, case 2, we have basically C when and each test condition. So here we're going to test first that the authorized user is not null. If they are, we're going to redirect to login.jsp and tell them to come back here when they've logged in. Same thing if this authorized user's auth level is not the correct value, which is set to 1, then we'll redirect to login and then they can come back here once they're logged in. Session scope user ID not equal to null. This is just a formality to make sure that our user ID actually is set. But here's the most important one. So even if they're logged in and the data is null in the session, then we can make sure to go get the data. And again, we've moved that into the getCityData controller. So the otherwise is essentially the default. When we have gotten through all of the other cases, we haven't hit anything that's bad. At this point, we can say go ahead and render the user information to the page, and then we'll actually go ahead and also print out the data from that city data. So how are we going to do that? we have the ability to do a for each loop on our objects. So rather than having to use code and write out a string builder that was spitting out the output every time we essentially hit a new row, we just added to the string builder and finally just outputted the whole thing. Now what we can do is build a table just like you would expect to see a table built, and we can wrap the table row creation in the for each. And this way, each time we hit the for each, it will print out each new item right into that table. So we no longer have to build a string builder. We don't have to use any scriptlet code. It's very nice. Well, how does this one work? We have for each. We have a variable that we want to have. Now, you could make this I and do a count if you wanted to. There's other ways to do that, but this is going to be more robust. It's going to work against our city data, which is going to be put into session scope by our controller. And then our city data is just our object for each one in this entire city data array list. And then I added in a var status equals iteration count. Now you don't need this, but this allows you to have an index on a for each, which is really nice if you need to have a specific index for some reason later. And I put that here on the printout so that we could see how to do that as well. And then each other cell is just simply going to be the city data properties. So let's go ahead and run our system. And let's watch all of these new tags coming into play. Make sure that everything works. And of course, we can see it in action. So let's go ahead and log in. And once again, here we'll use infinite skills. It really doesn't matter again because we're not actually validating at this point. We'll go ahead and set the cookie, remember us. So there we are. Let's view the cities. And there's our cities. And you can see it's very quick and information is pulled from session and it's displayed using that for each loop. There's our iteration count on the left-hand side, our ID, the different city names, countries, states, and populations. Everything is printing exactly as we would expect. Our country is, of course, still under construction, and we can sign out. We're not logged in anymore. We can clear our cookies. That's going through our different servlets now. Every page in our entire system at this point has removed scriptlets. So we're definitely in a much better position and much more closely aligned to the MVC pattern that we're ultimately looking for.